Members, we can start the meeting. And can you go through the formalities? Agenda item first is notice of recording stroke webcast. Can I remind members that to note that this meeting will be webcast for live or subsequent broadcast via the council's meeting YouTube site, and that members of the press and public may record and take photographs except where there are confidential or exempt items. Go on to the next item, which is apologies. Have we got any apologies?
Apologies from Councillor Roger Harmer and Bob.
Okay. The next item on the agenda is declaration of interests. Members are reminded that they must declare all relevant pecuniary or non-pecuniary interests arising from any business to be discussed at this meeting. If a disclosable pecuniary interest is declared, a member must not speak or take part in that agenda item. Any declarations will be recorded in the minutes of the meeting. Anyone have any interest? Thank you. Next item is action notes and action track for the meeting, which was held on 26th of September. Can you note those action notes and tracker? Any matters arising from those? Yes, Sharon, in the last meeting, we reported that in winter, certain old cemetery, the burials will be taking place later on, about up to 6 o'clock. Are there any arrangements for the lights in the cemetery?
I couldn't answer that because it's not my portfolio.
I can. We are making arrangements through the winter to pilot evening burials. I'm trying to think now off the top of my head. I've got a note on this, which I can send to you. It might be till 9 p.m. And obviously there'll have to be lighting.
It's summer, but it's winter. I think it's 6.
Through the winter. This is the pilot going through the winter, and we'll look to review it when we get to the spring. Would it be helpful if I sent you the note that I have? Okay.
Thank you.
You should come more often.
Following that, we discussed petition, and relevant cabinet members were sent a letter from the committee about the pesticides and also about the introduction of parking charges. So the next item is localization, and we got the leader, the director, and Chris Jordan and Karen Cheney, the head of service, neighborhood development and support unit. Over to you, leader.
Thank you. I think I'd like to start off by saying that the area of localization and the idea that we'd increase influence over service provision down to the very local level is, I think, in all fairness, the one initiative that we probably made least progress with over the last 4 years. What the intention is going forward is that we begin to accelerate our progress in this particular area. Saying that, though, I do think we have to be mindful of the current economic situation, which is markedly different from the one we were in 4 years ago. Sky-high rates of inflation compared with where we were 4 years ago, rising interest rates, and the cost of living crisis with energy prices being the main driver of that. All of these things will impact not only on this agenda, but on the broader agenda of the City Council as a whole. Those factors are giving us a significant budget challenge going forward. So I was rather grateful to the surprising announcement by the Prime Minister at PMQs yesterday that there's to be no public service cuts. We will see. Hopefully that will not be U-turned. what we have been doing since May of this year is we've had a little working group set up to look at how we might make some quicker progress on this particular agenda. And of course, we have announced the Neighbourhood Action Coordinator pilot. So there are now 22 wards that will have an officer, a CSDO officer, to help coordinate and be a single point of contact for both elected members and members of the public, particularly around the areas of waste, fly tipping, etc., environmental issues and housing issues. There's also a very small budget that comes alongside this of £10,000. And I do want to make it clear, because there has been some confusion in the Labour group, if nowhere else, about who's determining how this money will be spent. This money will be spent in consultation with the elected members in those wards. Will not be determined by officers and the elected members told what the money is being spent on. The officers themselves will cover 2 wards, so it's not quite going back to the model of ward support officers, where there's 1 per ward, because we don't have enough funding for the resource at that level. But it will. These people will operate across 2 wards, and I think they will be an invaluable resource for elected members. I met with the Nadim, his name is the officer who's been deployed into Shard End ward. There is a willingness to attend ward forums, as you would expect, housing liaison boards, etc. So hopefully, in the 22 wards concerned, the members will find this very, very useful. If it is successful, and we will be reviewing it in due course, then we will have to find a way of rolling this out across the whole of the city. Because if it works, why wouldn't we do that? As I've said, there's this very small localised budget that comes with it, but there are also 2 other localised budgets that are provided towards. One is around transport. Again, it's a small sum of money, and there are strings attached about what you can and can't spend it on. And the other one is the housing environmental budget, which, in my experience, is determined in consultation with the housing liaison board in the ward. I don't quite know how it works. I'm happy to see Ken nodding. In going forward, I think we, and this came up in the council meeting on Tuesday, which made me think again about it. The Commonwealth Games devolved budget that activated arts, cultural and sporting activity across the wards in conjunction with the Commonwealth Games seems to me to have been very, very well received across the city, both by elected members and by the public in the various communities across the city as well. There was a high level of engagement. I think it worked very well. As you're all probably aware, we do have the ambition to try to create as a legacy from the Commonwealth Games an annual arts and cultural festival, end of July, beginning of August, take place here in the city centre. But it does seem to me, if we can find the resource, activating communities so that they feel part of that right across the city would be a good thing to do. Now, £6 million is a big number, even in the context of the Birmingham budget. But subject to what I hear around this table this afternoon, I am minded to try and find a way for us to do that on an ongoing basis. The intention is, of course, to try to turn that festival into something that's genuinely international. So both international in reach and international in terms of the arts organisations that might participate in it. Should we be successful, we don't know yet, but we are bidding in November. Should we be successful in our bid to host the European Athletics Championships, it would be a nice coincidence, I think, if we could turn that festival into something genuinely international by 2026. And if we do that, of course, if we're already then activating our communities as part of it, so the whole of Birmingham feels that this is something taking place for them on an annual basis, I think that would be a very, very good place to land. But I'm interested in the views of this committee. There's then, of course, for some wards, not all wards, the community infrastructure levy. And you'll know if you're in a ward, Ladywood, for understandable reasons, has a large sum of money in that. It goes all the way down to, there is a ward where there's 36 pence, I think, available through Sharon's ward. It's more than in Shard End. But there is an effort to try and crowdfunding initiative that you're probably aware of. If you want to ask some questions on that, Chris has the detail on that. We continue to So we continue to encourage neighbourhood planning, but there is provisions, of course, in the law for people who wish to bring forward a neighbourhood plan. If you are thinking about bringing forward a neighbourhood plan, it has to conform to the overall Birmingham Development Plan. So you can't use a neighbourhood plan to restrict development, but you can use a neighbourhood plan to enhance or add to development in a ward. It's quite a complicated process that has to be gone through. It involves being able to demonstrate that there is community support through a ballot, but nonetheless, that is another tool in the box that's available at the ward level. Another one is neighbourhood councils or parish councils, so we probably know them. I've always been of the view the easiest, the cleanest way of creating local engagement and localising services is to set up a parish council. It also gives immediate access to a budget, but it's that immediate access to the budget that's the stumbling block, because again, you've got to get local community buy-in to this. So you're asking people to vote for an increase in taxation, essentially. Given where we are at the moment with the cost of living crisis and the fact that that's likely to get difficult over the coming months, that's probably not an option for the immediate future. But over the longer term, you know, you end up with directly elected representatives. They've got a budget. They have powers and responsibilities devolved to it. It is by far and away the cleanest way of setting up some form of devolved and local control. What we have at the moment, of course, in Allbar, Sutton Coldfield, and Frankly, thank you, where there are parish councils. Everywhere else, what we've got is the neighbourhood forum meetings and ward action plans. But I think it's fair to say we don't have ward action plans everywhere. Not every ward has produced one. The majority have, but not every ward. Now, I'm again interested in thoughts of this committee. And Sharon has been saying this to me for well over 2 years, so she'll obviously have some criticism for me outside of this meeting, but I am interested in the view as to whether we connect up the ward plan to the availability of devolved budgets. Because a very simple thing that we could do is say we will not allow access to devolved budgets in those wards who do not produce a ward plan. And we'll want to see the devolved budget connected in some way, shape or form to that plan in order to release spend on it. That would get everybody, I think, focused on the idea they have to produce a ward plan and they have to engage their local communities in producing such a thing. We should all be reviewing and renewing our ward plans. I understand there's a deadline being set on that. Is that January?
It is.
That's probably a deadline that I might struggle to meet. So
There's only one ward with a ward plan at the moment.
And that's yours.
And that's
Okay. Only one ward has so far reviewed and submitted a new one. And indeed, Sharon has also sent me a whole list of questions about various flexibilities that might be afforded to the ward. This committee might be interested in seeing that letter because it's something that could apply elsewhere as well. One of the things that has happened already, it did come out of a suggestion of this letter, this idea of no mow May, where you allow the parks and the grass verges to simply grow during the month of May, hopefully with some wildflowers in them, and then you come along after May and you do the normal mowing as you would. Myself, I think it looks unsightly, but I'm not on the view of centralised control. What I've said is if wards want to go down that route, then we will allow that flexibility and we'll allow that to happen. Talked about the Celebrating Community Small Grants Programme. So community capacity and infrastructure support. We are currently, or Chris is currently reviewing the amount of human resource we have available for support to wards, with a view to reporting back to this working group I mentioned earlier about how we might reconfigure that so that it's more effective and delivers more what local ward members would like to see delivered in their wards. I have been working as a memoir as I've gone through that to this chart, which you may recall it on this committee because it was originally attached to a letter that was sent to the cabinet member, and we have now populated this chart, and I think we circulated it.
That chart's gone out, yes.
Yeah, so this has been circulated. We've now populated it with the answer to the questions that you see, Marge hasn't got a copy. We'll send it round. It's populated now with the answers to the questions that you were asking, which are in line with what I've just said to you all. So I think I'll pause there because, as I say, I'm interested in the thoughts of this committee, and I'm also interested in getting some feedback from the questions that I've raised. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. Any questions from the member?
Mark is going to go first.
I don't know.
Councillor Ryder.
Yeah, on the tables.
That's an update bit. The other chart is with the services, isn't it? Maybe not.
Okay, apologies. What has been circulated is the chart, is that the chart that came in the
What's been
letter?
circulated is the update you've just given around various
Sorry.
update.
Which is different from the chart that was attached to the letter. The chart that was attached to the letter has been circulated, but it's only been circulated to the members of the working group, hasn't it?
Yes.
They're the only people who see it. We probably should share that as well with everyone in this committee, and we will do that.
Yeah, that's the first thing I was going to say, Chair, that the chart needs to come round to this committee, because it was this committee that wrote that letter to the former cabinet member. I think the key thing is, when we had our discussion, we were talking about the ward plans, and the key issue is how we get those to happen, how we get them implemented. So,
By that, you mean not written, don't you? You mean actually delivered. What's in them delivered.
That's what I mean. Yeah. Words are fine. We're good at words, but we're not much good at the action. That's what we need to do. So yes, it's the next stage. It's actually making them happen. So, the kind of focus is I suppose on that. And I mean, I think if we were able to implement those ward plans to make them happen, we need to think about my good old measures of success that I keep banging on about. But, if we really were to implement the plan, then I think those measures of success, services being different, localised to the area, and officers working together more and, being more locally based, councillors feeling that they've got more influence over things. I think, we'd feel that there was somebody to talk to change things slightly, to make improvements happen locally, and that residents would feel like their concerns were being acted on. So, if we were able to get those ward plans made to happen, I think it would be a way of achieving those 4 measures. That's sort of a bit of a focus.
Just pause there, because I think we need to test out whether we can do that through this pilot. So one of the things these neighbourhood coordinators will be doing is they will be convening a local partnership meeting. Will involve the police and hopefully other partners to deal with some of the issues that are on the ground. Let's say, for example, potholes or fly tipping. But there's no reason why in those meetings, in fact, it probably is the intention that the ward plan and how the ward plan is delivered can be discussed, because, of course, whilst the council is providing services in local areas, there are other partners that can help with this.
Of course, yeah. And I think that's one of the advantages of, locally based working, because it's a way of engaging with those local partners, isn't it? We know there are organisations out there locally that could be perhaps better engaged if we were able to, put in place a mechanism for engaging them better. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot to play for around the ward plans. I think they're going to be very helpful. I think the neighbourhood action coordinators will also be helpful. I mean, I've got some questions around the table that you did send out, but I'll just make my other points first. And then if other people come in, I could come back to my point. What residents say to me is, because as you know, I work on a neighbourhood basis in my ward because it's so big. Sharden's a bit different, although it's still got neighbourhoods.
Biggest single member ward.
Yeah, I know. You've got real challenges. But in our area, we've got 4 neighbourhoods really. And the way we build our ward plan is by working in those 4 neighbourhoods with residents, asking them what their priorities are, and then putting all that together as the ward plan. And the residents who help with that just say to me, Councillor Marge, how can we make these small changes happen? Because when they go to the council, when I go to the council very often, it's so hard to get through the fog and get to be able to work with the right people and get people to be flexible to say, well, there isn't money, but maybe we can do it in a different way. it's that kind of flexibility that we need. So I was going to say one of the main points really, Ian, is yesterday, was it yesterday? It was Tuesday. No, it was the day before, wasn't it?
Yeah.
The council meeting was on Tuesday.
Mm.
We had a bit of a discussion about it at council, and we passed a resolution to take this forward, an amended resolution, as it were. I think it would be very helpful if you could come back to this committee. Probably, I'd say, I mean, if you can come back before January, that'd be wonderful. But maybe come
What
back.
was going to say next week?
That'd be ideal. Come back in January with a real implementation for the whole of this localisation stuff. Because we need clarity on, you know, where we're going to end up with this localisation piece of work. And I think what we need is, and I'm not convinced that we've got it, in the same way that, I mean, I've got hold of this because I was interested, that the Coordinating Overview and Scrutiny Committee has been looking at customer services and all the things that have been going wrong with the complaints that we've been getting about service delivery. It seems to me that what's happening there is that a project team has been put in place of change makers, as it were, to bring about the changes that are needed to make our customer service better. Now, I think we need some kind of project team who's going to drive this, and I'm not convinced that we've got one, but if there is, I'd like to know about it, who are, you know, going to drive the changes. And we need a kind of timeline like customer services are getting to say, right, this is where we are, this is where we want to be, and these are the stages that we're going to go through to get there. So, I mean, obviously there's a lot involved in this, which includes all the stuff that some of us have been going on about with the culture change that's needed with the council. So I'd like to see, you know, if you can give me some view on that, how we're going to actually get this made to happen. I think it should be classed as a project with a change maker type team, like we have with customer services, that's going to deliver it. So those were some of the things that I think the points I wanted to make to you, based on what we discussed really at the council meeting and where we've got to so far. So could I leave it at that from me, see what you say to that, and come back to the table that was in our agenda.
Before you do that, can I deal with something? You've raised a lot of issues there. And I think that we've just had the month 5 budget monitoring report go through Cabinet. We're just over halfway through the financial year. I mentioned earlier that there are going to be financial challenges going forward. So I do think we've got to be realistic here about what we can do. So when you talk about a challenge team, as I've already said, Chris is undertaking a review of the resources that we have available with the intention of seeing if we could deploy those in a more effective and efficient way. And we'll have that conversation with you in due course. What I can't make a commitment to here this afternoon is an amount of additional financial resource that might be deployed. We've got to tie that into the budget. Similarly, with asking me to come back in January feedback, what I would prefer to do is run these neighbourhood coordinator pilots, collect the data back from them, and carry out a thorough review of how they've worked to come up with a sensible way that we might be able to move forward, learning from that experience. I also think that we can bring forward out of that review some case studies of how things have been done differently in these 22 wards as a result of having this additional resource. That will allow us to share some best practice and learning across the organisation. And I know, Marge, because we used to share a ward. And what I would say to you, and this is written into both the manifesto that we fought the May election on and the council corporate plan. It's all well and good going out and speaking to those local residents who have the time to turn up to a meeting and have a specific issue that they want resolved. I think it's equally important to reach out to those quiet voices, the people that never get heard because they haven't got time to go to a meeting, and understand what their priorities are as well. So I think we've got to be a little bit more sophisticated in how we move these things forward, because it's, to my mind, it is not fair to those people who are not time rich to say these are going to be the priorities and we're not even going to bother to attempt to speak to you. We've got to find a way of reaching out to more people. I don't know how many people there are in your ward and how many people regularly turn up to meetings, but my guess would be it's a very small minority of the total number of people in the wards. And then when it comes to flexibility in different ways of working, I'm open to that. As I've already said, I had a letter from Sharon. We're perfectly amenable to no mo may, if anybody wants to do that. I'll circulate this letter because there's a whole series of other suggestions on it. And, you know, if others wish to write to me with suggestions, I will have a look at them. And if we can make them work to allow flexibility in the wards, then, you know, that would be my intention to do that. What I wouldn't then want to hear back is that we've created a postcode lottery, because of course we will if we allow flexibility and different ways of doing things in wards. You can't do one without the other.
First of all, I certainly welcome the leader's commitment to having a look at effectively devolved budgets to allow us to actually deliver at grassroots level rather than being prescribed stuff. Right. I've spoken on many occasions about whether a ward plan is actually worth anything at the moment, apart from a wish list. And yet we're dictated to come up with one. And the last thing we are dictated to come up with one.
Well, not every ward came up with one.
Well, it
was a strange dictatorship.
I mean, at one stage there was a suggestion that came to here that we should be naming and shaming those who didn't come up with one. So if that's not dictating,
well, okay, Ken, I've made the suggestion this afternoon that we might make it a condition of the ward plan, the devolving of funds. So what do you think of that idea?
I think that's it, because people will actually see the worth of coming up with a plan. At the moment, people don't see any worth, or a lot of us don't see any worth in coming up with a plan that comes up with a wish list that will never be delivered because there's no devolved budget. And I do take on board your comment back to Marge about how many people turn up at our meetings and stuff like that. Certainly in my ward, where we're about to, where Langley's coming on stream, Peddymore is already up and running. We have at least 5 or 6 extra meetings a year through purely and simply discussing those items with residents, and yet they don't count as meetings where we're told to come up with 4 ward meetings a year, ward forums a year, or basically get slapped in the back of the wrist because our other meetings don't count. That's in the Constitution, the 4 ward meetings. So, yeah, there's got to be flexibility. I understand that too much flexibility is a problem, but there's got to be a certain amount of flex that not everything, there can't be one size fits all, because effectively that's sort of what we've got at the moment with the central control. So, yeah, the idea of devolved budget is great. You mentioned SIL. I'd like to mention section 106 monies. And I would love to see a report that says how much money has been lost through not being sold, not being spent. Yeah. Specific issue again in my ward. For 2 years, we've been trying to get a project through, and it's £150,000. With a there's not a lot of time left to spend this £150,000, and we cannot get the departments to move on it. We've been trying to get a specific project off the ground for 2 years, and it's ended up us going to the chief exec on at least 2 occasions to get response. So 106 also provides a lot of good money available to the wards, but there's got to be a drive or a push from officers to, if you like, come out and say, we've got this money, where do you want to spend it?
I'll just ask you one question, Ken, because sometimes 106 comes with strings from planners. So you have to spend it in a certain area. Not geographical area, you have to spend it on a certain.
It's got to be spent on certain things, but there doesn't seem to be any drive on it to get it spent in certain areas. And we have come up with projects that suit the criteria and we can't get it to move.
Okay.
So it's important that
I find that a bit odd, actually.
Especially when we're talking about a funding crisis and all the rest of it, we should be spending the money that we've got access to.
The officer, Hayley Claybrook, should be able to provide you with the amount of 106 that's available to spend in your.
We know how much it is.
Pardon?
We know how much it is.
Oh, you know how much it is. You were specifically asking me about clawback, so she should also be able to provide you the information about how much of that money has, if any, has been clawed back because of a failure to spend it within the time allowed.
I think that'd be an interesting figure for you to get you.
It would globally across the city. Yeah. I would hope that would not be a big number, to be honest.
Well,
can I just ask you about meetings? I think local meetings are actually quite important here. What we've currently got, correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, around Ward 4 is that they should be held, there should be between 4 and 6 of them held a year. I hold 6. I take your point, though, that if you've got something of the scale of Langley going on in your ward, there is probably a need to hold other public meetings. I mean, that is nearly 6,000 new homes. It's building of I forget the place now. It's a building of a new village anyway in the north of Birmingham. So maybe that's something we need to take away about if there is a need for more flexibility for ward members over meetings that you need to hold through the year.
Because obviously, as you do that is a huge project. And not only do we, we set up separate groups to take on initial discussion with the developers, and then we will have ward meetings after that to take it out to a wider audience, if you like. But it's a lot of time and a lot of effort on our behalf.
Just thinking that through a bit more, though, I would have thought the Places Prosperity and whatever it's called Directorate should be helping you to facilitate some of those meetings, because there is clearly a need to be talking to people about something on that scale.
Oh, we are very much so. We have been for the last 3-4 years.
Yes.
Sorry about this conversation. Sharon's asking me about Ward 4. To be clear, I am not saying that there needs to be additional Ward Forum meetings. What I'm saying is there are issues in wards where elected members may need to convene a meeting because of an issue. And I was citing the scale of that development. Yeah, but you have to pay yourself. That's the problem. And we need to. I think we need to take that away, myself and Chris, about how that is facilitated by the council.
I think. Correct me if I'm wrong, I think part of the point the council is making is that some of those meetings that are held don't count as one of the 4 ward forums. They're not called ward forums. And I think we do apply some criteria about whether forums are open to everyone to attend and things like that in terms of the definition of a forum. So that would be part of, I think, what you're describing to us.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you, Chris.
But it's still more meetings that we've arranged, and it is discussing things with the community and community leaders before we take it out to a wider forum. So it's in the rest of that. I think the one other thing I would ask, I mean, this committee did send a letter to the previous cabinet member asking for an update on 4 key items, and I think it's the 4 pointers that you mentioned. Yeah, on 4 items, we got a letter back, a response back by the cabinet member that didn't address one of them. I think it's only right that if this committee sends a direct letter asking for direct feedback on certain points, that the answers that come back address the questions that have been asked.
I can't argue with that, Ken. And as I mentioned earlier, we have now populated the table that came with that letter, and we will circulate it.
Just a couple of points, I think. What about engagement with the communities? And I have a firm view that we need to be bold and brave about how we do that. And I don't just think YouTube Live or somewhere like that. We held a community safety meeting, and this was a real eye-opener for me. We tested Facebook Live with the ability to people to comment. We had 60 people at the meeting, and we had over 2,000 people watch it online with people commenting. And I think there's something about kind of trying innovation and different ways of doing things to hear people's voices. I think that's really, really important. And I know there's whole issues about data protection and all that, but we just got to look at that and kind of be really, really clear about what we do. Because if we can get 2,000 people watching from home and engaging and hearing their voices, that has got to be fantastic. And that's got to be something we've got to try and listen and think about, you know. And I don't know how we kind of like, you know.
Well, I'm just saying to Chris, we should look at that. It's a really good idea. I wouldn't know where to start to do something like that, but I think we should look at it.
I had a volunteer with a camera that did this. So I was on a tripod, and he put the tripod there and just filmed it, just live. And then loads of people watched it. We did a load of stuff about advertising and getting people engaged in Castle Vale, but it absolutely works. And I think that's something in that. So that was my first point. The second bit's about cultural festivals. I completely agree with this. Because we did the Festival of Flying in Castle Vale, which was celebrating communities fund, and a little bit somewhere else across Commonwealth Cultural money. And that was stunning. It was absolutely stunning. 500 people turned up on a dark Saturday night to watch this. It was just some photos on my Facebook page of some of the acts. But it was brilliant. And the other thing about widening that to make it a worldwide focus, and this is in Erdington. Mal came into Erdington as well. It came to the city in Erdington. And it's things like that, I think, that put us on the stage for the city that we are, about openness and inclusivity. And we need to do much, much more of that. So I think that's absolutely amazing. It tells a story about who we are, which is the events that we're putting on.
Yeah, I agree with that. As I said a little bit earlier, I sat in the council meeting on Tuesday and listened to the debate on this. And that really what persuaded me that we need to try to find a way of doing something like that on a regular basis. Now, I can't promise because there was £6 million put into that Celebrating Communities Fund on a one-off basis. So we're, you know, as part of the budget process, we're going to have to give some thought to whether we can do it. But I was a little bit critical of margin about engagement. I think I can critical of myself as well for sometimes just assuming everybody comes into the city centre, and of course they don't, which is why I think it is important, if we are going to have a celebration of arts and culture in this city, it is important that we get that out to communities. So as I say, I came out the council meeting on Tuesday thinking, I've got to give some thought to this, and that's what I will do.
Yeah, it's just to respond back on the ward meetings. I think the information advice that we've sent out and the face-to-face meetings that we had with members, we've said we will help to support any which way that members feel is the most appropriate way for them to do it in their ward. So we offer, obviously there's face-to-face and there's also the virtual, which may be useful for people both Zoom and on Teams live. But you're absolutely right. The more people who can engage in the conversation, the better. Really open and welcome those suggestions, and we will help to support that because it's the right way forward, isn't it? And there are a number of wards who have done things in a different way, like you have. They're all a bit Heath Robinson at the moment because unfortunately we don't have the opportunity locally like we do here to be able to run the meetings like they're done here. So they're streamed and people can come in. But the way that you've described you did yours, others have done that as well, and it does work. It means you've got more people engaged. So we're absolutely, you know, I'll re-stress what we said on those two, the sessions and the information that's gone out to all councillors. We will help to support in whichever way you wish to have those your ward forum meetings.
Thanks, Karen. Right.
Yeah, can we just come back, Chair? Thanks. I don't want you to think, Ian, that we just have a few residents meetings. That's not how it works. My experience is that the more you activate or you work with residents, the more things happen. So, like, you know, we've had picnics in the park because of the resident leaders sort of group, you know. We've had cinema in the park, in a park that wasn't being used at all because it couldn't be, because I think I mentioned that the grass was neck high. But that's the kind of discussion that you want to have with your parks manager about how you can, within the budget, change things around a bit. And then each of these, the groups have Facebook pages, and there are like hundreds of people on their Facebook pages. So it just spirals, it mushrooms itself, and you don't rely on just a few people coming to meetings. That's not the way it works. But once you start with a group of residents, it just mushrooms. That's my experience. Looks like Sharon's nodding, that's good. I appreciate what you're saying about the Neighbourhood Action Coordinators, and that, you know, it'll be good to see how that works out. What about then if you come back to us here in March with some, because you've got some learning by then, that's a few months away, isn't it? And if you come back to this committee with what, you know, what has been discovered so far, and possibly with, you know, some suggestions about a way forward and some stages that we might need to go through. By then, there'll have been more discussions with you about, you know, how people are thinking on this, but that's a suggestion I'd like to make. And the other things I just wanted to say, on the table that's been sent round by Karen, I'd like to see the self-assessments that have come out of this localisation star chamber. So I'd like a copy of that. I don't know whether everybody else wants to be bombarded, but I would like to see that, please. Also, I'd like to know which of these Neighbourhood Action Coordinator pilots are up and running at the moment. And are we, you know, is everyone going to be told about which ward they're being paired with? And I don't know how you're thinking.
That information came out with the email that was sent out.
Is it about who people were going to be paired?
Yeah, there's a table in the email and it says, it lists down the neighbourhood coordinators and which wards they're working in.
Yes. So they're going to be a pairing of wards as well, because obviously a coordinator is going to service 2 wards. Yeah. Useful to know where we've got to with that, really. That's what I wanted to ask.
Do you want to let Karen just come back on that?
Yes, okay, right. Well, if I'll leave it at that then, yeah.
So as my short note said, so there have been different rounds of interviews. So the last one's just been completed. So they are, all those 22 wards are now, will be able to go for once they've started. We've just completed the second round. So that, albeit they've all started at different times, but my understanding is an email has already gone out to members, where the wards are paired up. So, for example, your own is paired with Bordsley Green, Bordsley and Highgate. Sorry, not Bordsley Green. Sorry.
Well, you wanted to criticise Bordsley Green?
So apparently being thought through. I know I've got no.
No,
it's just
most of them have been geographic, but they don't. Yeah, they don't all quite match. But more than happy to send it out again. But I'm pretty sure it has already gone out. But hopefully, what we'll be able to do is, if you just bear with me for a week, we'll be able to put your named person down, because we now know who's accepted those posts, and we can put. Yeah. Would that help?
Yes, it would. Yeah.
It has gone out because there was a member who spoke to me about the final sentence of it. Just on March, I'm happy to come back in March. And I'll tell you what else would be helpful, because you gave me the impression, March, when you first spoke, that you were finding it impossible to get any flexibility, and then you listed out just a number of things that you'd managed to get some flexibility on. So it would be interesting, and it's part of the data we'll collect, I suppose, through this neighbourhood coordination pilot. It'd be interesting to get that data about where there has been flexible movement in the way services are delivered in wards. And the example you gave, you're setting up activity in parks and getting the grass cut so you could do it, sounds to me like a bit of flexibility.
Yeah, but that's only one thing that we've managed to do. I've just asked somebody else actually about a community asset transfer, which has taken 18 months so far and still hasn't been completed.
Community asset transfer.
Yeah, of an old Scout piece of land that still hasn't done the transfer after 18 months.
It'd be illegal. That's the problem.
These cameras, you know, I mean, we've got a camera issue, can't
Yeah.
make that happen. Probably all give you loads of examples of.
Okay,
Welcome change. Yeah, it's with legal.
Yeah, as I said in answer to a question on Tuesday in the council meeting, I am aware of issues with legal services. I've spoken to the new city solicitor and she's going to come up with a plan.
Chair, can I just, sorry, can I just come back on that point with legal services? Obviously, there was a question raised with you at council with regards to the city's workings with certainly Sutton Town Council. And going back to my early days as a councillor, it was probably the same with Franklin Parish Council. And as much that there doesn't seem to be a recognition or a failure to actually get the message through to people that these organisations are important and that they need to be worked in. In this feedback here, it says, continued support with the two existing councils in Birmingham, that's Sutton Coldfield Town Council and Franklin Parish. Well, I think it was very clear the level of frustration that exists, and it is legal. I got involved in the transfer of Walmley War Memorial in the end.
Yep.
And so far, I think that's the only thing that's been transferred.
That was pointed out on Tuesday, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was pointed out on Tuesday as well. But there was it just took a little bit of side thinking and saying, well, we know that the initial request was to take Walmley and the other War Memorial and I think it was VZ Gardens. Why don't you break it down into manageable chunks and separate things? And it's just trying to get that desire to work.
I don't think that's the issue though, Ken, because we did precisely that, thinking that would unlock it, but it hasn't. There is a real blockage here in getting the legal clearance to make these transfers. And the most significant one, I mentioned this myself on Tuesday, is allotment gardens. Because when you look at the legislation for parish councils, it's actually explicit that allotment gardens transfer to the parish council. We're stuck in legal difficulty.
And then, leader, I've got a couple of questions regarding. We've got some new members and community infrastructure levy. If you can explain a bit more and how this money can be used. And secondly, Alexander Stadium, it's a huge asset for us, and just using it for the athletics, I think it could be used for community events, festivals, and for small and medium-sized weddings. It could be marketed, it could be an ideal venue and could raise a lot of money.
On community infrastructure levy, first of all, it doesn't apply everywhere. So when we first introduced it,
13 wards, I know this for 13 wards. It's for 13 wards, yeah.
Yeah, it applies to different types of development as well, at different rates. So we were very conservative with a small c about where it would apply and what it would apply to. So residential or office, hotel, etc. Because what we didn't want to do was stymie investment into the city. So it's not available everywhere. 13 wards, if you're telling me that, okay, I'll live with that. And there's also on still, there is a local element of, is it 15%?
15%.
Yeah, 15%. Oh, thank you. 15% is devolved to be spent locally. In the instance where there's parish council, it goes to the parish council. We've only got 2 of those. So this money is available in those wards where development has taken place, where the SIL has been levied. And on the local element, you will have conversations with officers about how that is going to be spent. I have been looking very carefully at the strategic elements of this, or the centrally retained bit of it, because I've asked that we have a review of how we're spending that, because in my experience over the last couple of years, we've tended to spend it on an ad hoc basis rather than having an actual strategy about what we're trying to do. And I don't think that's the best way of dealing with it. But you can get the information. I don't think your ward's on the list, actually. But you can get the information about which wards and how much money. The stadium, I absolutely agree with you. It's no good us having invested £72 million into what now I believe to be the best athletic stadium in the country if we're only going to have one meeting in there of, well, national athletics at the moment to that standard. So the investment in the stadium is more than just the council. So it involves Birmingham City University relocating their sports faculty to the stadium. Birchfield Harriers will continue to be based there. They have now the best asset of any athletics club in the country. UK Athletics are also based in the stadium. We're talking to other potential partners who may come into the stadium and put on events in there. I agree with your comments about festivals, films. We could do all of that sort of thing. We do need to make the most of this opportunity. Last year we had the Armed Forces Games in there. I think the intention is to do that again going forward. They're keen to come back to it. So yeah, we've got to make the most of this and really sweat the asset. As a report went through Cabinet on Tuesday, £24 million being spent now to put community facilities in and around the stadium as well as investment in the park in order that the park gets used more as well. So yeah, we currently have a subsidy. Guy probably knows the number. We currently have a subsidy for the running of the stadium. The intention is by bringing these other activities that we'll squeeze that out and at least get to a break-even position.
Yeah, ideal for small and medium-sized weddings. Can raise a lot of money.
You probably could do that in the lounge upstairs that we have access and can utilise. Whether the kitchen's big enough to.
The parking is the biggest hurdle in the city centre. But if we got 200 or 300, 250 parking space around the stadium, that could be ideal.
But not quite that many. But we're working with a partner as to how we can most efficiently run the conferencing aspect of the stadium. So there is a space there for those sorts of conferencing and event type activities. So those sorts of things will become available.
Upstairs, it's just the parking that.
I don't think we've got that many parking spaces. 250 is not ringing a bell with me. But yeah, we want to get the facility used as much as we possibly can.
Nothing else. Thanks, leader. Thank officers.
Back in Martin.
Let me go to the next item, which is number 6, and Cabinet Member for Housing and Homelessness, but Sharon Thompson, the Cabinet Member for Housing and Homelessness. Over to you, Sharon.
Thank you very much for inviting me today to scrutiny. I was asked to come and sort of share the priorities that I've got across the portfolio. And I know that obviously there's been changes within the portfolio in terms of Cabinet Member and also some of the things that were sat in there. And the list, the priorities that was there before, sort of re-looked at them, realigned them, tried to make them as kind of like specific as possible, taking into consideration what's going on across the city and also taking into consideration other factors such as the cost of living crisis. So I'm just going to run through with you, if that's okay, Chair, the list of what we've got down as priorities. Again, I'm happy to take any questions on that, and I think the officers are going to be to me. Yeah, okay. So in terms of the priorities for 22-23, one of the key things that I think we do need to continue with is to make sure that we have our own supported housing strategy in place, which is in relation to exempt accommodation and how we sort of manage manage the situation across the city in terms of exempt. And that's following on from the pilot that we did previously, the money that we've got again from central government and all the work that's taken place, including the scrutiny report that was chaired by my former ward colleague, Carl Rice. So that's a hugely important piece of work, and we've just completed the consultation around that. So one of the key things now is it's okay to have a document, but we need to make sure that that strategy is being implemented across the piece, and it's not just housing, it's other functions across the council working cross-directorate. The second thing that's absolute priority for the portfolio is to make sure that we complete the contract extension arrangements, particularly for the north, east and central west areas of the city. And that's in relation, and then we will have to re-tender the contract for the south area as well. So that's in relation to the repairs contracts for our own properties, Birmingham City Council. We've also I'm very keen that we have a wider priorities and sort of business plan against the HRA. At the moment, being back into the portfolio, I'm doing a deep dive with officers across every part of the HRA to get under the skin and have a real good understanding of what the finances are through there. So we will be completing a business plan there. And through that, we'll be identifying the priorities for the capital investment programme for 22 to 23. And those who have council properties within their ward, particularly ward members, will know that following on from Grenfell, when we took the decision, or the political decision, I would say, to prioritise fire safety in tower blocks following on from Grenfell, it did mean that there was a number of properties across the city who wouldn't have had things done like bathrooms and kitchens, and those are the things that you're hearing on a regular basis. So this is about making sure that we re-identify, re-prioritise in that space. Whilst we've also got the supported housing strategy, I think it's really important that we have a housing strategy to go alongside it, so it looks at other aspects around housing, and that there is an associated delivery plan that comes with that. So we're making sure that we're going to refresh that housing strategy, and I hope over the next year you will be calling me back into scrutiny to look at different areas of that as we go along that journey. Across the city, if probably more so now that we're going into the cost of living crisis and also fitting in with the green agenda, we've got to make sure that we develop a very robust plan setting out the delivery for our retrofit programme when it comes to BCC properties. Now, that's going to take a huge undertaking, but we need to make sure that we're putting a plan in place to achieve route to zero targets. And this will include the work that we're just starting with our own pilot in East Birmingham of 300 homes that will go through a whole house retrofit pilot. So that'll be the first for Birmingham City Council, but we're also working with housing associations looking at brand new technology that they're doing in their properties. We will complete a self-assessment of our progress in delivering against both the social housing white paper and the regulator's consumer regulations. And we shall also ensure that housing contributes effectively to the corporate response to the cost of living crisis. So I do agree that we do need a corporate response, but we need to make sure that housing is pulling its weight when it comes to that, particularly when it comes to our own tenants, but also thinking of the private sector. The delivery, we're going to deliver key changes to ensure that the private sector housing strategy for 22 to 27, that we can carry out that. So that's going to be looking at the implementation of new private rented sector operating model. We've heard about the selective licensing, so we've got to make sure that the software's in place, and also looking at additional licensing scheme if that is what comes out of the consultation results that we've seen that we did earlier on in the year. And then the other thing that I'm really keen to do is to establish an affordable housing development board across the council. So it's not just looking from sort of this housing portfolio, but also includes parts of Ian's portfolio, which Paul Kitson will help to lead on that, to make sure that we're really aligning different elements, including the waiting list and other areas with housing development. So we're really looking at trying to have that modernised approach also, and that's to do with tenant engagement, and that falls in line with some of the things that we're seeing coming out of the National Housing Federation. So I think those are some of the key things that we're trying to focus on. And the final one is actually making sure that we have a sustainable and effective temporary accommodation strategy, because we are going to need that more and more as we're seeing the cost of living crisis and we're seeing more people coming through homelessness. So we are looking at the prevention space, but we also need to look at how we're going to make sure there's the adequate properties in order to put people in when it comes to temporary accommodation. I think the final thing, just to say that Birmingham has been known for working quite effectively with central government, also working very well with the civil servants, various partners and agencies. We're always open to piloting things. We're always open to taking new money. So I just think it's clear to say that we will continue to build on those existing relationships and always advocate that Birmingham is one of the places at the forefront when it comes to new initiatives and new monies that might be coming through the system.
Thank you, Sharon. Any questions? Councillor Saqib Khan.
Thank you, Chair. Sharon, I understand that there are 25,000 applications waiting on the housing list, and we have a stock of 3,000 available annually to allocate the applicants. I also understand that there are about 2,000 new applicants applying each month. How are we going to meet the huge shortage of stock against the demand of housing, council housing?
Just to clarify some of the figures, we have a waiting list that's in excess of 22,000 live applications currently on the waiting list. And having spent a few months ago just been speaking to other cabinet members across the country, some of the London boroughs who are much smaller than us, some of their waiting lists are between 17,000 and 25,000. So considering we're the biggest local authority, I don't think we're particularly out of kilter with that. We have about 60,000 council properties across the city. And you are correct, there's only a small amount that comes up each year. So on average, I think it's probably about, is it 3,000, 6,000? It is about 3,000 that come up. But the reality of it is we try to encourage people to stay in their homes as much as possible for sustainability. And those properties only come up when people move out of them. So there's a number of things we are doing at the moment. So one, in terms of the, obviously we've got, Birmingham is the biggest council house builder. We're not building quick enough though. So we've put money aside previously to, I think it was earlier on in the year or last year, where 62 million went aside, and that was to also start looking at buying properties back, particularly this right to buy properties off the open market, so that we can utilise those for temporary accommodation as well. So that's one of the things that we are doing. We are looking at other types of build, so modular build and things like that to help, where we can put in spaces that are not sort of, which traditional build couldn't actually get into. And we are looking to work more closely with our housing associations. Part of the thing, I guess, across the city is everybody tells me there's a need for more housing. Everybody talks about that. But when you go into people's wards and you start talking about land or you start talking about other things, there's not many that want it on their own back doorstep, to be quite frank. So I think one of the things we do need is for elected members to be a little bit more open about spaces that might be available in their ward. But we are actually working through a plan. But unfortunately, there is a national housing crisis and Birmingham is not going to be exempt from that. So in short, we are trying to do what we can. We're trying to make the private sector more affordable where it is, and also that people want to sort of feel more comfortable going into that market. We want to also try to reduce the number of exempt accommodation across the city, because actually that's taking out family housing when we need that more than anything. And in terms of our own stock, we will always try to increase our stock by build, but the government doesn't make it easy for councils to build. So there is a programme on house building, but we are trying to look at other options and other ways that we can acquire properties such as buying. But it's also fair to say that housing associations are now also looking at what they can do in terms of increasing their stock with build within the city.
Thanks, Sharon. Councillor Ryder, did you raise? Yeah, first, then Ken.
I was going to ask Sharon about the tenant engagement review that I think happened. And where that's got to, because I think you were looking at trying to engage with more people, which isn't happening at the moment. talked many times about housing liaison boards and how, it's probably not, it's one way of doing it, but what's the progress really? That's the question I'm asking. And is that coming back to Cabinet with a proposal about a way forward for modernising all of that?
I'm going to let Naomi come in on that bit because she's been working on some of that work.
And the other thing I was going to ask, looking at your titles of modernisation, which I'm interested in, let's hope that's going across the council. I just wondered where we're getting to with, this is a bit basic, but it's such an irritation for all of us probably sitting here that have got sort of bits of housing land. Is there, what's happening about this, the need to modernise this land issue thing, where with cleaning up areas, we as local councillors come up with this issue of, we can't do that, councillor, because it's housing land. And it's just like working through a load of fog or glue, and you can never find out how you get something done because of land ownership, which is nonsense. You try telling a resident that and they say, well, it's a council, isn't it? So what's the latest on that?
So yes, you're right. We had an expert provider called TPAS, who are national engagement leads in the field of tenant engagement. They're really, really good. They came in and did a review for us, which I think you guys were all cited on, I think. Yeah, in this meeting. Yeah. So off the back of that, we have worked with existing tenants that are engaged to develop a tenant engagement strategy off the back of those, and a delivery plan and action plan off the back of those recommendations. So that is coming through the glide path now. TPAS are also still very much engaged with the service, and we have procured them to do a piece of work which is ongoing now around re-engineering engagement with new tenants, and they are delivering a series of workshops with our tenants across local communities outside of the HLB and city HLB structures to try and improve engagement there and broaden it within the scope of the new kind of legislative requirements as well around the social housing white paper. One of the areas we have to work on is understanding more around tenant satisfaction. So we recently did quite a very big survey actually to all tenants who could communicate with us either electronically or over the telephone around a set of proposed tenant satisfaction measures that came out by government, and within that we asked tenants whether they would like to be involved in kind of ongoing engagement or not. So we had, I think the number was 181 tenants come back and said they wanted to be involved with kind of our structures. So we are on the path to move forward there. Obviously we have to foster those new relationships and review the way those boards work, and that's a gradual thing that will take time, but we're very much moving forward with that in the background.
So is it all coming together in a cabinet report that's going to come to cabinet and set out how this is all going to work then in the future?
I don't think it's actually going to go to cabinet. We can certainly bring it back here. I think we'll definitely bring it back here. The taking it through an officer route to see how to get them to sign. It's not a key decision as such. It's basically setting out our approach to engagement. So, but we can bring it here. I think it's probably
it doesn't need to go to cabinet because it's not a sort of a key decision, and it's sort of, I think it's cabinet member can sign that off. But what I'm happy to do, as Guy said, is actually for it to come here before it, as the last place it gets sort of ratified, but comments on it.
Then the other thing about the land.
The land, yeah. So you're probably aware from previous committees that we're going through a bit of a transformation programme within housing, which is covering a whole raft of areas. Certainly in my area, one key area that we've been lacking on is around our data and intelligence in terms of assets, but also in terms of just general data and information to help inform. So one of the key things we do is reviewing our approach to things like the GIS mapping system to ensure that we've got accurate data on where our land is. As you quite rightly pointed out, sometimes you go to an officer and they're not sure themselves.
So we've got, frontline staff who can easily access what land is held where, so we've got issues of people wanting to know what can we do with that. I will say generally when I come onto the housing strategy, the issue about available housing land is a big one. And go back to the previous question about we don't have that plethora of certainly land that we can do developments on, for example. But as part of our transformation, yes, it's about data intelligence, but it's also about what we're going to do with issues around things like vacant land, community facilities, tenant halls that we've got to review as well. So there's a whole raft of things.
Thanks, Sharon. Unfortunately, I've got a bit of a list.
Just thought as well, you was quiet on Tuesday, Ken.
All right. Okay, I'll start off with a compliment then, as I'd like to compliment the Cabinet member on the very successful seminar that you arranged on exempt accommodation. I think there are 150 people there. 220. 220, there, go keep on. I think it highlighted the importance of the subject and the problem that I think cross-party support on. Compliments on that. The one thing that has come up, and I think again it was mentioned at council, is that the council itself, as well as working with government and trying to get them to change things the way that we've asked them to, is to use the powers that we have got, such as the covenants and things like that. It's just to sort of wield our own big heavy stick. And I take it that maybe goes back to the issue that the leader was mentioning with legal services, maybe not being prepared to do that as they really should. So I really think we need to be looking at the powers that we've got and using them, because I think we've maybe lacked in that a little bit. With regards to the extensions to the contracts and retendering, we'd like to see timelines on that so that we can measure on it. Because time and time again, procurement system has failed. So it'd be nice to see some guideline or timeline on that. Retrofit, hot topic, great idea. Obviously, it's got to be paid for, and it'd be interesting to see how we're going to do that. I know we've got to do it, that's an issue, but how do we pay for it? How do we decide whether a property is actually worth doing it? What's the cheaper option? Either do the retrofit or knock down and rebuild. Things on that. On the private rented sector, and I think this was actually came up on the housing strategy. Obviously, you could drive around the town and around the city and even out in the suburbs at the moment. The number of developments that are being built at the moment is build to rent. Is there any way we can influence or build in that when developers want to do that, it actually helps us address our housing shortage rather than not having any effect on it at all? Because I get the impression that a lot of these places that are getting built to rent are really for people that are not in the city at the moment and are not in our waiting list. So it'd be nice to see if we could do something about that. You mentioned my apologies for this. Just look back in. The establishment of an affordable housing delivery boards. I wouldn't mind knowing what your vision of the makeup would be on that. Again, certainly from a political point of view, I'd like to think that too would be cross-party, if that was going to be part of that. So there's that one. And finally, your list of priorities are great. How much of that ties in with the combined authorities approach? Because obviously it's not just a Birmingham problem, it's a West Midlands problem, and as you highlighted, it's a national problem. But I would hate to think that we're sitting here as Birmingham trying to reinvent a wheel that somebody else has already made. or they might be able to use our wheel, which is even better. And so it's finally bringing up that Marge alluded to with the tenant engagement. I'm a little bit disappointed that there's nothing on the priority list there about housing management. You know, we've been in these meetings before where we get told about aiming for best in class and stuff like that, but there's nothing here about actually how we're going to manage our housing stock and manage our residents or tenants. So it'd be nice to get some sort of feedback as to where that fits into your priorities. I think that's the list finished, Cabinet Member.
So first of all, thank you for the compliment on the exempt accommodation conference that we held, and you know the travel the day there was a rail strike, so we didn't get some of the speakers, but it was pretty cost party as well because Bob was supposed to be speaking at that, and Jess Phillips spoke as well. So I just want to put on record my thanks to yourself and also Roger Harmer for the cross-party work that we've always had when it comes to this particular topic. So that's the first thing. It's me putting really more. In terms of the existing powers on exempt accommodation, obviously I've just come back into, well, I haven't just came back into the portfolio in May, picking back up the localised piece of it. Yesterday had a very robust meeting with officers. We had we have an exempt accommodation sponsor board, which includes cabinet members who have different elements in there. So the cabinet member for finance is there because of housing benefit. John Cotton's there because of antisocial behaviour. Mariam Khan's there because of adult social care. So we have this kind of sponsor board. And yesterday we went through every single action that was on the scrutiny review, which will include obviously what was raised in full council on Tuesday. So I can assure you, I can give you my assurances that I am getting back on top of that in terms of the council side of it. I have sent an email, if only this morning, to pick up on bits when it comes to legal bits, and just reminding them they've got a part to play in this, and also helping us to drive forward on things like the covenant situation and other legal aspects. So those things are being picked up. I can give you assurances on that. And I'm happy that when the next time I come back to this committee, I can give you a bit more of a rounded sort of, a bit more detail on what we've done against the action plan that was set out through the scrutiny review, if that's acceptable to the committee. Yeah. In terms of cabinet member priorities, yes, I agree, housing management is important, particularly around our stock. The priorities that I've set out are for 22 to 23. And what I didn't want to do was just put everything in there and try and focus on everything in a 12-month period, because, you know, you won't achieve everything that you need to do. I need to be on officers on the specifics. So it's not a pass out, that it's not that we're not going to be looking at in terms of the housing management side. That is still included in the day-to-day stuff that we do. But I'll let Guy come in a bit more on the housing management side. Before he does, I just want to bring up the bit around the combined authority. So in terms of the combined authority, they haven't got the wheel, but they have got some acts that they can leverage in some funding. I sit on the West Midlands Combined Authority Land and Delivery Board, so I'm sat around the table on that. So I make sure that Birmingham is included in that. I also chair the West Midlands Combined Authority Homelessness Members Advisory Group. So we are always interconnected in that. So it's always making sure that we're part of the broader picture. The reality of it is people move around different areas, and there have been a couple of occasions where we have had conversations where we've done things with the CA. So, you know, who is the best place to put in for this particular bid funding? So we are not working in isolation. We would never be able to hit the targets if we was an insular council. We've got to work with other partners. Developers, I've been having a lot of conversations since being back in the wider portfolio, particularly with Paul Kitson. And I know Paul's been here for several months now, but he's very clear that you know, that we need to make sure that our developers are really sort of supporting our agenda in terms of the development plan. So I can assure you that conversations around developers and how they fit in with our actual need is taking place. But again, I'm more than willing to maybe come back at a further time with Paul Kitson to actually address that in more specific, if that's what this committee would like us to do. Was there anything I've missed?
So, well, I suppose two. One on the housing management, and the key priority that Councillor Thompson has set out there is about our self-assessments against the compliance framework, which includes things like the consumer rates, which captures how effectively we manage our tenancies, how effectively we engage, how effectively we repair and respond to complaints, etc., etc. So the housing management bit will fit under that particular property, because there's quite a lot of bits and pieces that fit between all of those headlines.
So the self-assessment bit is the bit that we need to focus on before we get onto the management.
Yeah, and making sure that we are compliant, because we're moving into the new regulated regime, and the regulatory social housing is going to be to come assess us folks that haven't done before in terms of that compliance, things like that. And I think perhaps as part of your work planning, it may be that we need to bring something here which presents where we're at with that self-assessment, please. So give you some assurance. Just on the retrofit question and funding, it's a huge challenge, not just for us, but whether you're an RP or whether you're an authority elsewhere, because the cost of delivering the targets around the route to zero, what we've estimated about 3.6 billion for us, just for our stuff. So it is a real challenge, and we're not going to do it through just abnormal HRA. What we are doing though is assessing our housing revenue account, as Councillor Thompson's spoken, in terms of stress testing what capacity there is over the longer term to increase our borrowing capacity to deliver on some of our strategic priorities. Retrofit is one of those, but it's not the only one. So we've got decent homes challenges, we've got building fire safety, and obviously we've got the route to zero going. Where we're at right now is about making sure we're doing all we can to maximise the available grant that's available through phase through government. So the social housing decarbonisation is going to the deadline for those bits is mid-November. So we're currently assessing, because there's a need to match fund that grant, the capacity by which we can maximise the grant, but make sure it's affordable for the HRA in terms of that match funding. Because the grant's only putting a £10,000 per property ceiling on the grant, and in essence the works cost something between 30 and 40,000. So we're doing these literally almost twice a day, because the deadline is really fast approaching. And obviously we've got other schemes that we're delivering grant that we're in the private sector through the authority delivery.
Just to add to what I was saying about the retrofit, I've had a conversation with the Devon Cabinet about this as well, particularly around the point that you're making that, we need to be flexible enough. Is it best to retrofit, and when is it actually viable to retrofit, and actually is it better to regenerate? So we are having those conversations, and recently the APPG Birmingham, which is the cross-party or parliamentary group, they launched the Three Cities programme, and the Three Cities programme is between Birmingham, Wolverhampton and Coventry, which is looking at retrofit across the three cities, and I think it's between 65,000 properties. Social housing properties, so it's not just us. And again, that is going to be dependent on what happens with the levelling up agenda.
Thanks, Councillor Saqib Khan.
It was something to do with the shared accommodation, which Sharon's already spoken about.
Councillor Ray Goodwin.
Perhaps an observation as much as anything, because I like radical. And I'm just wondering if there's kind of, you talked about modular build and modular housing, and how far we've got down exploring about all of that, especially around young people, I guess, where there could be modular builds and retrofits, all manner of things which would help the housing crisis we may have. at kind of perhaps reasonable cost, I would say.
So in terms of the modular.
Yeah.
I mean, I think in terms of Birmingham, I mean, I've been to visit a lot of modular across the country to look at what's best practice. It's not, I know people have this misconception that it's cheaper. It's not necessarily cheaper, but you can have some really good quality, and it's usually anything that we do that's in terms of new and moving forward has to fit in with the green agenda, full stop. And that's with our, you know, our new programs that are coming on with new build. The other thing that we are looking at as a council is Birmingham. Yes, Basil's are looking at a live to work scheme, which it looks at the rents, looking at the rents becoming slightly lower for younger people as they go in, so it's more affordable. So we are looking at a range of things like that. But in terms of house building, in terms of the council, we're probably the one more innovation than many others. But, you know, we do need to crack on. I've said this to Paul Kitson, we do need to crack on with some of the modular stuff because it will help us in terms of difficult spaces such as your old sort of, you know, your garage sites that you can't do anything else on. So we are looking at that as a council, and we have been for some time. But again, it goes back to the point that Ken made earlier. We need to make sure that we're feeding back to you some timelines.
Can I just to come back and to add to what the cabinet members just said with regards to the modular building? It was also when I did a review into affordable housing a long time ago. Even then, we were looking at affordable modular build, and whilst it wasn't any cheaper, what it did do is it meant that you weren't relying on the skills that we now got shortage of. But where it gained, it was a faster build. So effectively, you started gathering rental income quicker. So the actual build was just expensive, but you just got it finished a lot quicker, up to 12 weeks earlier.
Yeah, very much. I think we've been in an odd space over the last couple of years with the industry when it comes to building. So, you know, we're guided by the industry, and there's not a huge amount of places across the country that do large scale modular, but we are looking into it, and I'm happy to come back with that.
Anybody else? If not, Sharon, I've got a couple of questions. You know, the BMHT, they have delivered excellent schemes over the last decade or so, and in the start, you know, wherever they developed a scheme, they were outright by some shared ownership and some social housing. And I've seen a couple of schemes coming up now, but there's no shared ownership schemes. You know, I think it's very useful to have that because a lot of young families, they can't afford to buy outright, but and secondly, and they're good for say 30, 40 plus units. And I think we need to have a building within the city council like BMHT where we can deliver small schemes like, I mean, we got the huge challenges and we need to build everywhere where we can. And I can give you an example in my ward. There was a piece of land, housing owned, no more than 3 meters in width, and 15, 16 meters in length. And that was used for a fly tipping for the last 15 years. And then I've been reporting to the council every week, day after week. And after 15 years, they decided to sell it through open auction, and it was sold for 13,000. This guy who bought this piece of land, applied for a 2-story, 2 flats. He got the permission, and then left it there for 2 years. And then he sold it for 25,000. That same piece of land. And the new guy applied for a 4-bedroom house. He got the planning permission, and then within 8 weeks, he gave a contract to a small firm. From getting onto the site, within 8 weeks, he delivered the house, 4-bedroom, and he's getting £1,000 a month through private sector. And this, you know, firm that we need to build, you know, you can utilize for every piece of land, whether it's suitable for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10. And there, I mean, I know in my own ward, you know, there's lots of pieces of land, and they will be throughout the city. And I mean, this guy, you know, under 140,000, with buying the land and all that, you know, he's got a 4-bedroom. You know, that 4, 5, 6-bedroom, we are very short of those. And unless we do something like that, I mean, just rely on developers and BMHT. Every unit that you can deliver, it accommodates 1 family or 2 families. That's what we need.
I mean, BMHT, I mean, that's the council's house building arm, and it does do as much as it can. And just this week, Tuesday, through Cabinet, we'd agreed, I think it was for 65, is it properties, I believe, is in Bartley Green? I think it was in Bartley Green, was it? I'm looking over to Councillor Brewer because that's her ward, but that's in Bartley Green, and also it talked about renewing a sort of leisure facility as well, which was much needed in that area. So we try to be flexible. I understand what you're saying in terms of the smaller two, but it has to be financially viable in order to do it as well, because the government doesn't make it easy for us to build, so it has to be a financially viable scheme. But I'll let Guy come in because I've seen it.
Yeah, so just on the issue of those small plots that, you know, are difficult sometimes for the council, what we're looking to do, and it's funny, probably don't need to do my next presentation because I think we've covered everything off almost, is how we can package those up to encourage developers to work with us that can perhaps deliver those quicker. So that's definitely something we've started that conversation with the sector, with the registered provider sector, opening the doors again now. Again, I'm quoting from the presentation, open the doors. We haven't worked with you effectively enough. We haven't been as receptive to you. How can you, what do you need from us? Part of that incentives is actually identifying some land opportunities for them. So because we can't put all our eggs into the BMHT basket to solve the housing crisis, basically. Just on the sort of tenure mix of developments, I mean, normally there will be, as you say, a mix. So there will be a mix. Obviously, clearly we need to max the affordable housing and especially the social rent housing from any new development. But we recognise that there's a need to ensure there's we can meet the aspirations of local people to move into home ownership as well. We went to the new housing minister down to Farnborough Road, didn't we? And they were support through the Help to Buy scheme. I've got attended the mixed tenure development there, which is ownership, city council, pioneer housing, and low cost home ownership. So that's a model that we want to try and take forward and recognise that it's a balance to strike between maximising your affordable and social housing, but at the same time providing that opportunity, low cost home ownership.
Did you say you took the housing minister to Farnborough Road?
Yes, we did. But it wasn't it was at their request, and we can't tell them who they can have around the table, unfortunately. But we had 2 days notice, and they were quite specific on where they wanted to go. So they wanted to go to Stockland Green to look at exempt accommodation. They wanted to go to that particular one in your ward, and then they also went to Washington. We went with them to Washington Court, which is in the city centre for homelessness. Both of the MPs were notified that they were coming because I personally emailed them to let them know that where they were going in terms of the visit, to make sure that they knew. But like I said, we had 2 days notice. They said where they wanted to go. I had to wangle my way in to be there the whole time that we're there because they only scheduled me in for a short period of time. But so that's just we're not if we're getting asked if they can do a visit, we normally will just go ahead with it and not try to turn it down based on who can be there.
Yeah. Is anything else on agenda item 7?
Yeah, so
If you want to add anything.
you don't need to put the presentation up, but what I'll try and do is sort of put that conversation we've just had in the context of how we're pulling this together within a housing strategy. We spoke today about some of the challenges we've got, but there's plenty of opportunities as well. We're a large city. We've often used that as an excuse to, as a hindrance. But we're really at a stage now. We want,
kind of well again with HS2 kind of embrace the opportunities at the scale of Birmingham and its young population, diverse population. However, that's in the context of the fact that we've got some really key challenges around housing, and those challenges potentially compounded by the fact that we've got forecast population growth of around 150,000 and the need to provide both housing and employment space for that population growth to happen. That's in the backdrop of us not having, swathes of land and opportunities that low-hanging fruit as we termed it is being taken up. So we haven't got the degree of opportunity to do that ourselves. So that's why we need very much in the housing strategies theme is that it's a shared strategy. It's not just a city housing strategy. It's not even really just a city council housing strategy. It's a sector strategy. It seeks to set out how we need to work with the housing sector as a whole, whether it's RPs, whether it's the private rented sector, investors, developers, to meet some of these challenges. So what we've done so far is obviously we've done what's called a HEDNA, which is the Housing and Economic Development Needs Assessment, which sets the Employment Needs Assessment rather, which sets out, and you might remember it as previously called a SMAR or something. It's the Strategic Housing Market Assessment. So that's been updated and refreshed, which sets out some of the challenges and targets we need to meet around new housing and levels of affordable housing within that. Historically, we've delivered on the new housing targets, but we haven't delivered on the affordable housing element. And as we've talked today around, high numbers on the waiting list, can't rely on the social, Birmingham City Council's housing stock to meet the housing challenge. We've got to look at a whole range of opportunities. So the time's right for us now to bring together both priorities for our own stock, but also meeting some of the challenges we talked about into a housing strategy, which is targeted to hit Cabinet in December. To date, we've done a range of consultation on the proposed priorities, which is included within the presentation. I'll come on to those briefly in a minute. We've had big stakeholder events. We had one at, I call it the Drum, I can't remember what it's called, the Legacy Centre, that's it, where we invited in Homes England's chief execs of housing associations across the city. Obviously, the third sector people that we've been working with throughout, the likes of, and Sharon kicked it off, the likes of Jean, Bowlers, Jeremy, task force, to kind of test out our assumptions around what priorities within the housing strategy should look like. As I say, it's going through consultation. I mean, we've consulted through Be Heard publicly. Obviously, we spoke to City Housing Liaison Board. We've taken on board, as part of that strategic housing market assessment, we did about 1,800 resident surveys, which was asking questions around people's aspirations around housing, the quality of their existing housing, etc. So we've used a lot of that bottom-up data and intelligence to feed into priority setting. And so once signed off in December, we're looking for a formal launch in January. Mm-hmm. So we've basically categorised the priority and the strategy into three key headings. One is around obviously the supply, and that's that priority of supply is not just about building, it's about how we're maximising the availability of existing stock, making sure it's using best use. Councillor Thompson talked about the opportunities for the work we're doing in the exempt sector to bring forward housing by reshaping that. And actually trying to work with providers and create incentives for them to get, to halve that sector's provision and release more family housing. So priority one is very much around that, and we've talked today around the need for that to be a collaborative approach. It's not just the council, it does being open to business to work with those that can access government grant funding, that can access land and actually deliver quicker. As we've talked about, affordable housing delivery targets historically low, challenges around growth, the fact that we've kind of used up all of the main opportunities we've had around land, the issues that we've got around capacity and capability within council to time is mentioned. So within this first priority, there's a number of key work streams. Obviously, strengthen more formally those relationships and partnerships with RSLs. Across across council and across direct affordable housing delivery board, at the moment, council is very much trying to make sure all different parts of the council from an officer perspective are joined up on this. So that's the likes of planning, because planning have got a key role to play in helping us to accelerate delivery through their processes. But the property services are about making best use of the opportunities around that property portfolio generally. Obviously housing, city operations. So it's bringing together an officer group that is taking this forward. There's not been any talk of a member led group at the moment, but that doesn't mean to say that's not going to happen in the future. This sits within the council's key priorities in terms of its delivery plan, so it's reportable through that process. Obviously, the stuff that we've been doing today in terms of consultation has enabled us to strengthen those relationships with Homes England, who are, they're obviously a national key player in terms of helping facilitate regeneration. So that first priority is around that supply agenda. There's clearly a lot of things that are detailed that falls beneath this, and I forgot to, in the introduction, just to introduce this. We're not presenting to you today a fait accompli written down housing strategy. This is just testing out any thoughts on the priorities, which aligns, very much the conversation we've just been having, but also the fact that this does kind of sit alongside things like the emerging Birmingham development plan as well, and various other strategies. So that first priority is very much about the properties. It's about the supply. It's about making sure we've got the numbers right. Second priority is about the people. So it's about citizens being able to access housing and to sustain housing that meets their needs. And that definitely brings in the issues around people's financial resilience in the current climate, not falling into down the homelessness route. So what we're doing around being part of the council's new early intervention and prevention approach, that we're doing upstream prevention activity, that we're providing good offers for young people, also in terms of our offer for older people in terms of housing, looking at things like the linkages between housing and health. And there's a strong thing through this around we need to strengthen our housing and health partnerships. Whilst the energy efficiency fits more important, very close eye on in terms of people's who are currently suffering through the cost of living crisis, rising energy bills, the potential impact that's going to have on health for some people that are vulnerable, that aren't eating properly. So our approach to trying to make homes energy efficient is critical around that. So obviously we've got increasing demand around homelessness. So how are we going to feed things into that early intervention and prevention piece to respond to that? Look at the cost of living, but real issues in terms of, like I say, temporary accommodation, specifically around families, and the need to identify accommodation of the right type so that we can relieve those, get those families out of suitable temporary accommodation and into more suitable accommodation. All the temporary accommodation strategy and all those feed into this particular. Just quickly on the final priority. So we talked about the properties and the building. We talked about the people. Next one is around the neighbourhoods and our approach to making sure that existing stock is of good quality. And there's a key theme within this priority around the route to zero and how we're going to how we're going to deliver, how we're going to fund, invest through what's our strategic approach to retrofit. And that's not just for our stock, that's for how we're making sure that poor quality housing generally in the city is of poor quality, whether it's social or private. So how are we going to respond to some of those challenges through maximising government grants, through working through investors to try and drive down costs of retrofit because it's very expensive. This also brings in the general issues around the private rented sector, not specifically just about enforcement, but it's very much around we've got an increased reliance on the private rented sector to relieve some of our housing challenges. Really got to make sure that we're making sure that the private rented sector is accessible, affordable, and it's of good quality. So this brings in about how we're working with landlords to make sure that landlords aren't charging extortionate rents. It's challenging LHA rates. It's introducing selective licensing, providing incentives for landlords to work with us through perhaps entering into leasing schemes with them, for example, so that we've got properties that we can access and we've got to make sure that it's sustainable and affordable. Talked about route to zero. Just generally then, in terms of strategy, those are the three headline priorities. There's more detail in the slides, and as I say, simply need that. We've got some draft narrative now that needs to get all of that into the strategy. In terms of, so we don't actually have a housing strategy at the moment. This is a refresh. It's out of date, and recognise that delivery of what we set out to commit to, then we haven't necessarily delivered fully because of the governance structures that we had wrapped around the delivery of that strategy. So the final few slides just talk about, illustrate and a refreshed approach to how we're going to make sure this becomes a living, working document underpinned with a detailed delivery and action plan, and then we've got governance routes like we've Sharon talked about the sponsor board that we've got for exempt. It's quite a lot of detail that board receives in terms of delivery. So we want to do something similar for this. So I think I've flown through it, but I think we covered a lot of it through the first session. But
Thanks, Guy.
Just ask one question about private renting stuff. Because we're having to obviously refer to people to the private rented sector because we haven't got the homes. Is there a list that the council has of sort of reputable landlords that we offer people who are looking for homes? Or if we haven't got one, are we intending to get one?
We have, but we've got to build on that, I think, because when I say it's a list, we are working directly with that. We've got property accommodation finding that is specifically tasked with going out and identifying good landlords. It can to agreements and arrangements that can take. But I think we need to do more around that because when we talked about the scale of the challenge, but yeah, we are.
So there isn't a list at the moment that we can offer to people who are looking for those sorts of homes.
So if someone's if they come to us through the waiting list and they say that they don't mind going into private rented sector, it goes to this particular team that Guy was talking about, and they see if they can source reputable landlords. So they've almost the private rented sector are working on developing that sort of scheme. Whether there isn't a list per se where you can go onto a website and go through it, we haven't got that up and running.
No. But internally, obviously, we've built that of assets of private rented landlords that are suitable, that we know is accessible.
Can I just bring in around that actually, just with the private rented sector around those landlords, that developing that base and that list isn't as easy, I suppose, as you would think because of the affordability issue. And we have to, the piece of work the accommodation finding team is trying to do at the same time is make that an attractive offer, an attractive package for landlords who could realistically just go and rent to any young professional or whatever. So we're trying to work hand in hand to do that so we can develop that base.
Sharon, in regards to shared accommodation, I spoke to you about this a couple of weeks ago as well. I had a resident who was from Smallheath, my ward. He was made homeless and then he was forced to go to Luton. I mean, he was a cancer patient. He had a lot of hospital appointments. His children were in schools in Birmingham. What can we do in terms of so if someone is homeless, who's lived in Birmingham for the rest of their life, can remain even in a shared accommodation in Birmingham rather than going to London? I had someone that's gone to North, and
difficulty is that we are sat in the middle of a national housing crisis, and that is ultimately what we are. So we've got probably over 4,000 families that don't have a permanent home at the moment. They are in temporary accommodation of some form. Now, 4,000 sounds a lot, and it is a lot. And again, having spoken to some of the colleagues across the country, in particular London boroughs, their numbers can be quite more extensive than ours, in all honesty. And the thing that we do struggle with is having space available within the city. There is no local authority in the country that wants to send people outside of their borough. Nobody wants to do that, but the capacity just isn't there. And what we don't want to do also is then start going into a space where we will just accept any hostel or any bed and breakfast and just say we'll use it when it doesn't meet the standards that we think it should meet. So it's difficult, we know, and I think we try our best not to send people outside of the borough. And sometimes it's usually where there's a massive emergency, so it's like there's nowhere else that night somewhere. But the team do try as much as possible to meet people to bring people keep them in the city. One of the things that we have been doing, and we are launching it, we've talked about it a lot, it's got people in it at the moment. Ken's been to come and visit with me and Roger Harmer, is we've got temporary accommodation centres. So if you remembered a few years back, we launched Barry Jackson Tower, and now we've just launched Gardens. And the whole point of that is that we manage them ourselves. We have staff on there almost 24/7, or at least someone that does the security, but it means that you're keeping people within the city and it's a better accommodation. So in the times that we're in, I think part of the strategy has to be, can we see about having more temporary accommodation centres rather than sending them outside of the city? But again, I'll be clear with elected members, when these proposals come forward, there is always an argument in every ward, not on my patch. And we need to be thinking about the bigger picture around this, but we will be trying to identify more where we can actually do that.
After London, here in Birmingham, the rents in the private sector are very, very high. And last month, and my interest was going from 2% to 6% more. But they're going to increase the rents even more. Living cost crisis. Most of the families are in the private sector, and they are really struggle.
We do anticipate it's going to get much worse. You've got the thing with the mortgages. The mortgage prices are going up to maybe like £500 a month. That's going to have an impact. Landlords are then going to try and place that on tenants, so you are going to see that happening. We're also seeing consultation at the moment around the rent cap. That's going to have an effect on the council in terms of our own stock. It's going to have an effect on housing associations, and it's going to have an effect elsewhere. So I anticipate an almost tsunami that's going to come towards us. But what I was, without being overly political, but what I was slightly concerned about was the fact that, we've been promised that we was going to have a no-fault eviction sort of ban. And now that's been U-turned on. So again, that's going to bring more pressures as landlords start to evict on the basis of things that are not actually the fault of the tenant. So there's a whole raft of things, and actually we're going to see huge challenges. And whenever there's a crisis, you always find that the crisis, housing follows the crisis, but it usually comes at a lag a little bit further down. And that's what we're going to see with the cost of living crisis. We're under no illusions. That accompanied with the Ukraine's for Homes coming towards an end as well. That's something that we need to deeply consider in terms of how we manage that situation if people decide that they no longer want to stick within those sponsoring arrangements. So I'm under no illusion it's going to be an absolute rocky ride, but we need to be prepared for that. And that's why having these strategies in place is important, but also making sure that we've got timelines behind it, because we need to crack on and get on with the work so that we've got places to move people to.
Thank you. We need to move on. Agenda item work program. It's for noting and March.
It was just that we're going to take the street. The proposal is to do November, December and January, 3 meetings. And Councillor Idris and I had a bit of a chat beforehand and thought that just to play on the safe side, would people be willing to have, like, if we get 3 different councils in to talk to us about what they do, 3 good practice councils, we might need to extend our meetings, just say by half an hour. Would you be willing just on these 3 occasions to do that so that we can fit it all in? So that was our thought.
Yeah, it's good. Next item on the agenda is,
We've got Ian booked in, haven't we, now for March? Yeah.
The only thing on that is I think that meeting was the one that you set aside for voids, so obviously it's whether you're happy with that adjustment.
Would you vote?
Well, it's used in that meeting as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd be quite happy. Yeah.
Okay, right. Then see how we go. Maybe we'll do it all by 4, but
right, that's March.
yeah.
Date of the next meeting is 10th of November. Same committee, same time. Can is request of call in stroke councillor call for action for petitions received. The next item is other urgent business. No. And the final item is authority to chair and officers in between the meetings, if anything.
Great.
Great.
Thanks very much. Thank you, everybody.